Hi students, in the past class we have learnt about why do sexual mode of reproduction happens in animals or humans, right? So in this class we'll understand how do plants reproduce sexually. So in flowering plants, so reproduction happens in flowering plants. What do we call the flowering plants? Flowering plants are also known as angiosperms. So flowering plants are also known as angiosperms. And non-flowering plants, we call them as gymnosperms. This you will learn in your 11th or 12th biology. So how the reproduction happens in gymnosperms. Now we are going to understand how a reproduction happens in flowering plants. Those are angiosperms. In flowering plants, we mainly have the reproductive part is flower. In a plant, stem, root, these all comes under stem, root, leaf comes under vegetative plant parts. We have already learnt about vegetative propagation. I told you in vegetative propagation, reproduction happens with the help of vegetative plant parts. So why I mentioned their vegetative plant parts? Vegetative plant parts are roots, stem and leaves. Then what is a reproductive part of a plant? The reproductive part of a plant is a flower. Okay, so here the flower contains a male reproductive organs and female reproductive parts which are helpful for the sexual reproduction. So, in sexual reproduction, flower plays a major role to produce a seed, right? So, let's examine these parts in a flower: sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil. These are the four main parts in the flower. Let's see this flower. This flower name is datura. I hope you all learned in your previous classes. This structure which holds all the things inside this is called as sepals. So in scientific term we call it as calyx. So the petals we call them as corolla. These are the petals. Inside the petals you can see some structures. Let's open the flower and see it. It right. So I am killing the flower now. Right. See, let's open this sepals. So I have opened it. Now see here. Right. So these are the structures. These are the structures with some stick-like structure. To that one oval shaped thing is there. These structures we call them as stamens. These are the male reproductive part of a flower. So here stamens are male reproductive parts of a flower. If you touch the stamen, some powder like substance will touches to you. That powder like substance is nothing but a pollen grain, which is it produces pollen. If it enters into the female reproductive structure, pistil or stigma, then it fuses to the ovary which forms a fruit. So in the middle a different thing is there. You can observe. If you observe it, this structure we call it as female reproductive part of the flower, which is nothing but pistil or carpel, or we say this line tube we call it as style, and the top one is stigma which opens, which is sticky which is very sticky in nature so that it can hold the pollen grains. See, with this, now let's examine the male and female reproductive structures here. See, let's take one of the stamen from here. Right. So I have taken one stamen here. So if you see this, there is a filament like structure, and at the top of that here anther. So this part we call it as anther, and here the down one is filament. Tube like structure is filament and this structure is anther. So filament holds the anther. Anther produces the pollen. Anther and filament together we call it as a stamen. Right? These are stamens. So this is pistil present in the middle of the flower, center of the flower, and this is the female reproductive part of the flower. It is made up of mainly 3 parts. What are the 3 parts? The swollen bottom part. Let's see it. Let's separate it. Then only you can understand. So I am removing all the stamens here. Right. These are the stamens. Those are attached to the corolla. So we'll say it as corolla, the petals. Attached to the petals. Now see. Here the down swollen part. I hope you can see it. So the down swollen part, which we call it as ovary, the down swollen part, inside that ovules will be there. So this down swollen part is called as ovary, and the filament like structure, which is a tube like structure, we call it as style. So this is style, and at the end there will be a small opening and sticky like opening will be there. This structure is stigma. So here in a female reproductive part of a flower, we have a stigma, style, and ovary. If these 3 parts together, we call it as pistil. So pistil is the female reproductive part of the flower, and stamens or male reproductive parts of the flower. Here, if only male reproductive part, some flowers will contain only any one of these parts, either a female reproductive part or a male reproductive part. Those flowers we call them as unisexual flowers. We call them as unisexual flowers. Different flowers contain different types of things. See here in Datura, stamens are attached to the petals, and they are unique here. They are different. We can see them separately. Here, if you observe in hibiscus, this small line like structures, or here inside one more tube will be there. These are stamens, small here. And here stigma is 5 opened. So these all reach to one tube-like structure which reaches to the ovary inside. If you want to see the ovary, let me show you. So 2 different flowers, different types will be there. So inside this, you can see a ovary inside this. Okay, right. So here the swollen part inside, here it is ovary, and inside a white tube like structure will be there, that is style. Here this is stigma, and these are a small thread like structure is filament, and the top notch dot like structure is anther, which produces pollen grain. Right. So now let's understand how a pollination and fertilization occurs in plants. Now we have seen the parts of flower. So what are the major parts of the flower? They are sepals, right, petals, and stamen and stigma. Stamens, and okay, we'll say it as pistil. Right. So these are the 4 main parts of the flower. So which parts are taking part in reproduction? Stamens and pistil. Stamens produce male gametes, and pistil contains an ovule which contains egg, which are female gametes. So sepals and petals. What is the role of sepals and petals? Sepals hold the flower, and petals will have attractive colors to attract insects. Why to attract insects? To happens pollination. So in plants, 2 processes will be happened. The first process is pollination, and then seed formation. Later, this seed will grow into a new plant. Here we can see 3 processes. One is pollination and fertilization Fertilization leads to seed formation, and seed formation, then it will goes into germination, right? So we'll call reproduction as seed forming as reproduction. We call seed forming as reproduction. So later the seed goes into a new plant, that comes under germination. So reproduction is nothing but formation of a seed in a plant. So in a flowering plant, in a flower, we have four major parts. We discussed that: sepals, petals, stamens and pistil. How this reproduction happens in this? So we discussed the parts of a flower. In that I have shown you the stamen. So in stamen there is a tube-like structure, we call it as a filament, and followed by the tube-like structure there is a bulb-like structure, we call it as anther, which contains male gametes that are nothing but pollen grains. That is a powdery substance which is present over here. If you touch it, you will feel a powder-like substance in your hand to your fingers. Then this powder-like structure, if it reaches to the stigma of a flower of the same flower, if it reaches to the same flower, we call it as a self-pollination. If it reaches to the stigma of another flower of same plant or different plant, we call it as a cross-pollination. So here, how this happens, how pollen grains come to the stigma of a flower. How it will comes? It comes through the insects like honeybees or butterflies. These all will go to the flower to suck nectar, right? So while touching a flower, this pollen grains will touch to the body of the insect and they travels to the another flower. If it went to the another flower, this pollen touches to the stigma. Stigma will catches that pollen and it sticks to the stigma. Later, how it enters to the inside, it enters to the inside. So as I told you, in pistil there are three main parts. The first part is stigma and the tube-like structures, that is style, and the swollen part down is nothing but ovary. Ovary contains ovules, inside that egg cell is formed, right? So this egg cell, this pollen should reach to the egg cell and there it fuses. It forms a zygote. Later, it develops into seed where it reaches to the new plant formation, right? So here, when the pollen grain come here, it forms a tube-like structure to enter into the style of that particular flower. Later, it reaches to the ovary. Here, after forming this tube-like structure, inside the pollen will be there. This pollen travels through this and it reaches to the ovary. Later it enters into that and it fuses and later it forms to a seed. It forms a zygote and ovary will become a thick structure like a coat-like structure, how a seed happens. So after that slowly the petals and calyx, these all parts will shed off. This will be the seed. To cover this seed, a fruit will be formed. So this is how it happens in the plants.
Students, till now we have learned that the pollen grain which touches to the stigma, it reaches to the ovary and later it fuses with the egg and forms a zygote, later develops into a seed. So we discussed the same point here. A seeds will be formed inside the ovary, later it develops a coat-like structure outside. These all leaves, these all petals and the small parts outside will be shred off. They all will fall down and this ovary develop into a seed and fruit develops outside the seed while covering the seed. It protects the seed. Later what will happen? See, now let's understand about seed. So to understand this, we have a small experiment. We can do it in our home. What is that experiment? So to observe a different parts of seeds, you need a small Bengal gram seeds. Take a few seeds of that Bengal gram and keep it overnight. Later, remove all the water and cover it with a wet cloth. Later what will happen? Here now the seeds slowly starts opening. Now this seed slowly develops a small structures. What are the structures? If you observe here, this is the seed. Let's see it bigger. If this is a seed, if you open it, here two structures are there. These structures are food storage, which we call them as cotyledon. So here if you observe, two are there. This type of seeds we call them as dicotyledonous seeds. This further you will learn in your next higher classes. These cotyledons store food for the seed for growth. Then what will happen? The down part is called as radicle. It develops into a root. And the top part is plumule, which develops into a shoot. That means stem part. See here. Let's observe this. See here what's happening from this seed. A down part is growing into inside the soil and it develops its roots. The top part, the first leaf plumule part, is started developing its leaves and stem. Now what's happening? This food storage slowly disappears and it becomes into a new plant. So this is how a seed develops. This process we call it as germination. We call this process as germination. So the reproduction in flowering plants is observed till the formation of a seed. So till the formation of a seed we call it as a reproduction, reproducing a seed. Later development of a plant from this seed is called as germination. Don't confuse with these two processes. So the first process is reproduction, where a seed is forming here and later it is developing into a new plant. That is nothing but germination, right? So this is how we learned now. In the next class we are going to learn about reproduction in human beings. Thank you.